on this episode of Spirit Talk.
And they had an encounter with up to 60 gnomes. I'm not talking one of them saw one gnome. They saw 60 gnomes. The reason why this particular case is an exceptional case in this country is because of the amount of children who saw what they saw, the amount of time that they spent having the experience, and the fact that they were interviewed 2 days later by the head teacher. They were also interviewed by a local newspaper, and their stories didn't waver.
Hi, I'm Chris Fleming, the creator of Spirit Talk. You're listening to the podcast where I'll be bringing you the greatest thinkers, researchers, and contributors from around the world to discuss what we know in the field of the paranormal, life after death, and the pursuit of higher consciousness. Hey, it's Chris Fleming. Welcome back to Spirit Talk. Spirit Talk. You gotta be kidding me.
It's a new name.
In all my years of doing this, 130 episodes, this has never happened. For those that have a tear or a hole in their soul, here is some Spirit Talk.
Oh, bless.
Oh, this is going to be an interesting podcast.
It is.
Oh, my brain, actually, I feel like I don't have even control of my brain right now. It's just really weird. I feel like I'm coming out of some fog. Ladies and gentlemen, we're trying to get this podcast started, and I'm having some brain fog right now. This is Spirit Talk, and I want to welcome you back. This is 2022, and, brand new year here, and we're getting off to a very weird start. But I want to share with you something real quickly. May of last year, in 21, I had an experience with none other than I can call a gnome. And as crazy as that sounds, I know what I saw, as well as what transpired 2 days later, and I'll share that story with you later in the podcast. But because a gnome is an elemental, and I was in Scotland filming a show where we went to the island of Wollaton and brought a castle where there were elementals, and we came in contact with elementals. I had some extraordinary conversations there with the Fae. So I thought it would be best to bring on what I consider one of the experts out there dealing with elementals, Kate Ray. Kate, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me back. It's been too long this time. Good couple of years.
I know. You are a wealth of information regarding elementals. In my life, I would not expect or believe that a gnome exists. I've seen it in illustrations, in certain fairy tales, stuff like that. We talk about the Smurfs, which looks like they're based off of the gnomes. But to actually have, in the last couple of years, elementals that we come in contact with via EVP and ITC tell us that gnomes exist, communicate with them, and then actually see one, as they say, seeing is believing. I'm now a believer. So myself needs to know more about them, and I think my listeners would be interested in this as well. So can you please tell us, from your knowledge and experience, what is a gnome?
So like you, gnomes for me, out of all the elementals, out of all the Fae, I have real difficulty getting my head around what is a gnome. How we're presented gnomes in culture, in literature, in artwork, it is quite a childish concept. It has a concept that has an air of folly about it. So I find it difficult to grasp. However, my very first encounter was with an earth elemental, and it wasn't your classic gnome. And I'll tell you a little bit about that later on. So what are gnomes? Gnomes basically are one of the four elementals, and they are the elemental that dwells and works and functions within the earth. Not necessarily in the depths of earth like dwarves do, but in that sort of subterranean, between your garden and probably, a few foot down. They tend to be described as you would expect. Small beings, no bigger than sort of height of your waist. I can't even talk tonight. I'm having one of these
I know, right?
confuddled
I don't think
problems
they want
as
us
well.
to talk about this.
I know. Bizarrely enough, while you were talking about gnomes, I've just got to put it in there because I had a friend of mine he's quite famous over here, but I'm not going to embarrass him by telling it anybody. And it's not who you know, by the way, Chris. It's not that famous.
So it's not
person.
Barry.
It's not Barry. No, I would tell you if it was.
Right,
I'd embarrass him.
All right.
So a friend of mine had an experience when he was first on his spiritual path, and he was working with the different elements and bringing in elementals into his working practice. And he didn't believe in the physical existence of these things. He knew they existed on a spiritual plane, but didn't believe that they could be brought into the material realm. And he tells a lovely story about how he went to bed one night and he had several of them dancing around the bottom of his bed.
Oh my God.
And he is the kind of person who he's very, very straight-laced. And for this story to come out of this man's mouth just blew me away. So he was the same. He said he would have expected to see a flying fairy, maybe a salamander in the fire. But we all have trouble grasping hold of the concept of gnomes, and I think it is because of that childish quality that they have, often linked with gardening and gardeners and a beautiful rolling vistas that are well kept. They're very much attracted to spaces that are cared for, so not so much wilderness, although experiences have been encounters have been had within wilderness places. They are the kind of the doers. They will help birth plants into the world. They will help crystals form. They will help compact the earth into marble and alabaster. They have all those kind of jobs. And I think they're quite work orientated in that way. They're not, philosophical. They're more, get out the hammers and do jobs and get on with what they're doing. It's interesting, though, because the word gnome is fairly modern in mythology. So we have gnome-type creatures and earth-dwelling type creatures that come up within Celtic mythology, Scandinavian mythology, really ancient mythology references too. It wasn't until the 16th century that the word gnome was actually birthed, and it comes from Paracelsus, who was an alchemist. And he used the elementals to birth magic into the world. He believed that these things held the qualities that would be needed within alchemy to make gold out of thin air or whatever alchemists got up to. And he termed gnomes. Before then, they were more pygmies or dwarves, or even the tree spirits, the fauns, etc., were seen in that same ilk as gnomes. But gnomes specifically were born almost like an egregore. So an egregore is a being that's brought forward through magic to do work for whoever brings it forward. Okay. And then they can form a sentience to them. They will form themselves and detach from that person and move off. So it's a bit confusing. The word gnome is quite confusing, and the word elementals is quite confusing in a modern sense, because we see it as very black and white, as in there are the four elements, and these things make up the four elements: the undines, the salamanders, the sylphs, and the gnomes. However, the range within those, through what we know through folklore and mythology, is just massive. Right. It's absolutely massive.
Some people out there might be saying, okay, come on, gnomes, there's no such thing. They're these little people. The people need to realize, too, is we only see a certain part of the visual spectrum. We see a very small percentage, 10%. There's 90% we don't see. And one of the things I learned when I was in the island of Ireland in Scotland is they said they go back into the ether. The Fae will retreat back into the ether. Well, the ether is the electromagnetic field. The ether is the different plane of existence that we can't see. So that possibly is why we're not able to always see them, but sometimes we can see them pop in and out of our visual spectrum. I did a little research regarding short people, okay? Mm-hmm. Just because let's talk about the actual physical realm that we can see. And I looked up that there was 3 foot tall people that existed. They're part of an archaic human inhabited species on the island of Flores in Indonesia. They were called the Flores Man. Their nickname was the Hobbit. And they existed more than 50,000 years ago. They were only 3 feet tall, 7 inches in height. They were discovered in 2003 on the island of Flores in Indonesia. Partial skeletons, and at least 9 individuals have been recovered. And then in 2017, they did another study verifying their existence. Now, when we look at other certain species on this planet of humans that exist, you've got the pygmies. They call them the Bambuti, Bambuti, and they're only 4 feet tall. Okay, they're 4 feet 6 inches. The average size of some of these pygmies is usually about 5 feet tall, but there's over 120,000 of them. Now, you look at the Guinness Book of World Records, and the shortest human on record, understand this, the shortest human on record, 2012, Chandra Bahadur Danji, was under 2 feet tall, and he died at 72 years old. I mean, there's pictures of him, because he just died in 2012. He was born in 1939. As considered the shortest man ever on record. And then in retrospect, you've got, the tallest individual was, Robert Pershing Wadlow. And he was 8 feet, 11 inches tall. So you have the existence of human species in various forms that go all the way down to 2 feet tall and to almost 9 feet tall. So it's plausible that we have a species that are just a foot or shorter tall that exist, but they exist slightly out of our spectrum. Why? Is there any idea why they're outside of our spectrum, that they're not in our realm of sight?
There's many different theories. One of the theories that I've literally just come across recently, I've been doing some research for an essay in a book that I'll talk to you about in a bit. But so one of the theories is that elementals, the Fae, don't have immortal souls. So that they don't have that element of their selves to be truly within the material realm. So they're never truly in the material realm, and they're never truly in the liminal realm. So, the spiritual realm. They're liminal. They're in between. So they can come into the material realm, but apparently it's not for an excessive amount of time, because that can be quite damaging, and they can't stay within the spiritual realm because, again, that's quite damaging. So they live in this very narrow liminal gap of energy where they exist, popping in and out of both realms. I don't know about that. It was just an interesting theory that I came across, that it was to do with them not having the divine spirit within them. The theory is that when they die, they just then go back to the element that they came from. So if they are a gnome, for instance, they will go back to the earth and become a part of a rock or a crystal, and that would tie in with a lot of fairy tale and folklore, especially about things like giants sleeping and becoming mountain ranges, etc. It is just one theory. I think. There are some mind-blowing theories out there, and I could talk all day about things like the holographic universe, where everything's folding and unfolding and refolding, and nothing's static and nothing's material. You could talk about quantum physics, etc., and get into all those realms. But I think ultimately the answer is I don't know. It's if I ever get to have a conversation with a fairy long enough, it's definitely something that I'll try and ask them. I don't even think that they'd know, though. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing. I mean, because we look at the spirit world, obviously we're not able to always see spirits, but yet they're there in some type of inner dimension or a dimension of ours. But, I reflect back on when we were done Help My House is Haunted and we were in Calverton, and I said, pixies, where are you? Which is a form of elemental. And I got an EVP that says, I'm right here. I'm a flower, and it's so clear. I'm a flower. And it's like, I can't see it, but yet it's telling me it's right in front of me. And when I was doing my walk around as well, which you don't see on the show, is there was all these pixies. I said, oh my God, they're all there in the plants and the trees. I can't see them, but I can feel them. And on the recorder, they're all yelling out, pixies, 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 that they're there. But I also reflect back to my childhood. When I was 5 years old, I got lost. I spoke about this on one of my podcasts, but I didn't get into detail about the voices I was hearing coming from the flowers and the grass, because what superseded that came right after that was more dramatic was there's this slit that appeared, these guides, and they said, follow me, and I followed them to get back to where my house was. But just before that, as I'm walking down the path, I'm hearing all these voices coming from the flowers and the weeds. And I turn to the right. They're like, we're over here. We'll help you. We'll help you. And I'm like, and I'm looking around because I can't see them. I'm getting scared. I'm like, I can't see you. Where are you? They're like, right here. And I'm like, no, I don't see you. Don't do this. You're scaring me. Quit hiding. They're like, we're not hiding. We're right here. So I couldn't see them in the grass and in the flowers. And that's when this slit appeared. And my guide says, we're going to take you. So that was my first experience, but I have some validation because on my 40th birthday, my mom gave me a framed picture that I did finger painting drawings in preschool or kindergarten. And you see all these happy faces and sad faces and neutral faces flying around the trees. And I'm circling them and I'm shooting arrows around, showing that they fly all around the trees. And my mom had asked me back then, what's that? I said, those are the nature ghosts and spirits. They're in the trees and in the grass, but they don't come into the house. And she's like, what do they look like? I don't know. They don't show themselves to me, but I hear them talking to me and they talk, we talk back. So when my mom gave this to me, I had some of my memory coming back from those very brief encounters. And I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I've had contacts with elementals as a kid, but I never saw them until I was an adult. So for me, I find this fascinating. And personally, I don't care about the skepticism or the disbelief because I've not just had one experience, I've had multiple. So to me, this is an adventure, this is a journey, this is research to delve deeper into their realm to learn more about it. And that's why I have you on here. I know we spoke briefly in the past when you talk about hopefully I'm pronouncing this correctly, the Rosicrucians. Is that right? Rosicrucians? Yeah. They were a spiritual cultural movement that were in Europe in the 17th century. And they talked about the existence. I mean, their esoteric order was based on seeking knowledge and stuff from nature and ancient truths and from the past. One of the beliefs they had were in these elementals. And part of their ritual or part of what they did was they would meditate and put themselves into a certain consciousness so they could see these elementals that are just outside our visual spectrum. So it became fascinating to me that there was a group of people that would practice, and it was part of their belief system that these things exist. So, you have to look at this and go, with modern age, technology, moving away from the forest, cities, we don't have time for the nature to pay attention to it like a lot of cultures, Indian tribes and stuff did, where they paid respect to the nature spirits. So that brings us back to gnomes. We have proof that human beings that we've uncovered or lived within our time period were as short as 2 feet tall. I looked up a little bit about gnomes on the internet and doing my research. And there's that famous illustration for a book on gnomes with the red cap and the blue suit. And he's got it at 15 centimeters, which is only about 6 inches tall. So, Kate, I'm just going to tell you this story, and then I want to hear some other stories. And I always, when I have an experience, I write it down in my journal. All right, because I don't want to forget the details. So I want to share this with you and the viewers, and any feedback from you would be phenomenal.
Yeah.
I wrote here on Tuesday, May 11th in 2021. Last night, while walking from my kitchen into my office, I saw a small black mass about a little over a fist size shoot across the floor from right to left and then disappear in the wall. I don't know what it was. but it was definitely a shadow of something that was staying there. It was outside my visual spectrum, or was just a spiritual energy. I filmed this on my cell phone after it happened and caught my reaction on my kitchen camera. Ironically, the next day, which was Tuesday, May 11th, while I was in the bathroom next to my office, I had the door open, and yes, I was in the bathroom, ladies and gentlemen. I was sitting down, okay, and I was on the phone with David Schrader, who does Holzer Files, and he's appeared on a lot of other shows. He's a good friend of mine. And we were talking about something else. While I was on the phone with him, outside my right peripheral vision, something caught my eye. And I quickly looked to the corner where the door frame was, and right around that is my office. And there was a figure about 1 foot tall, peering around the corner, just alongside the door frame, looking straight at me. It was about 4 to 5 feet away. I thought for a split second that, what the heck is that? And then all of a sudden I realized I'm looking at a little man, and quickly arched backwards out of view, like, oh, he sees me, and took off. The only way I can describe it from based on what I believe I saw was a gnome, a short, stubby, human-looking figure in white and blue clothes, but the white, I believe, was the beard, the blue clothes. Noel, my cat, was sitting next to me, but did not react to it. It did have a red cap on, but the cap was not pointed. It was folded backwards. But what struck me was the thick white beard, its chubby little nose and face, which is identical to the illustrations we see representing Gnome and the statues that we see. But this was a real human figure, only about 1 foot tall. Now, I screamed, and Dave's like, what's going on? He starts laughing. I go, you are not going to believe what I just saw. Oh, my God, listen to me, Dave. I swear to you, I just saw something that looks like a gnome. And he starts laughing. He's like, get out here. I said, no, I'm serious, man. I'm serious. Now, the question is, why did I see this? I, don't know. But there's another part to the story.
Okay.
Is because it was so intriguing, so just amazing that what I saw. Every Wednesday I go to see my mom, and I slept at my mom's house that Wednesday night, May 12th. The next day, May 13th, was my birthday. I'm going to read this to you. Last night, slept over at mom's house, heard a moaning and crying coming from her room, and she was yelling, leave me alone, leave me alone. She was being attacked by something. The very next day, I'm in the room on my laptop, and I tell my mom the story about the gnome. And she's like, oh my gosh. She was like, do you think I have any gnomes in this house or on this property? Because she lives in the countryside. I said, Mom, I don't know. This is the first time I've had an experience with a gnome in my house. We've talked to them and talked about them in the UK when we're filming, not in my house, right? And Mom's like, well, I hope I have some gnomes. Well, understand that my mom is in a wheelchair, a motorized wheelchair. So she goes down the hallway to the other side of the house to get something. I'm on my laptop, not thinking anything of it. And about 30 minutes later, she's coming back in the hallway, and she screams and yells at me, Chris, knock it off. That's not funny. And I'm like, what? And I'm sitting on my laptop. She comes into the room and she tells me that she's going down the hallway and she hears us hut, 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 right around her, like right behind her. And she thought it was me playing some type of joke in the hallway. When she tells me this, I go, Mom, oh my God, that sounds like a gnome. It sounds like something like the Seven Dwarfs from Snow White or something like they'd be doing, like, hi ho, I was off to work, we go, right? And I start going, oh my God, Mom, what did you just say a half hour ago? I wonder if I have gnomes. Geez, I wish I had gnomes here. And you heard what sounded like a gnome. She's like, oh my God. So those are the two physical encounters with a gnome. And I'm going to play later here some audio of them talking to us. But, Kate, what do you make of that? Why? Why am I seeing gnomes?
So I've got quite a lot of questions about that one. So did you go to, was this after the Scotland visit? Was the gnome incident after Scotland or before?
This was before the Scotland visit, but it was after, 2019, we were at Calverton. And when we were at Calverton, the crew left. I said, I want to stay in the forest because I knew the elementals were there. I knew the pixies were there. I saw them and they spoke to me. But we weren't there to talk to elementals. So I decided to stay. And during that 20 minutes, 30 minutes that I stayed in the forest, I recorded on my recorder. I felt their presence. Later, I listened to the recordings, and very faintly, I had responses to almost every question, as well as I was hearing their comments. The one thing I had said was, pixies, are there such thing as gnomes? And they said, yes, but we don't like them. And I said, why don't you like them? He says, because they take stuff.
Oh.
And that was the only reason why. They take stuff. And I asked, is there like a king gnome or a king pixie? And they said, yes, they do have certain leadership. They also said they don't like the imps, and they got mad because the imps followed us, the demonic entities followed us into the forest, which was disrupting them, that they've always had battles. I told the elementals that, I would like to see a gnome. Okay. And I would like to see other elementals, which I've seen sprites since then. And I believe I saw some fairies when I was on ayahuasca, which I'll tell you about next episode. So that to me was really interesting. And the other thing was, you brought up earlier, we just really don't know exactly where they came from, this and that. I had asked them, and through various ITC, as well as what I was feeling and listening back to the recordings, I said, are you descendants from the fallen? And they said, yes, but we're not evil like the imps are. They're neutral. Yeah. And they said, we can't go into the light. It'll burn us. But I caught a remarkable response at the island of Aden, and they said, anoint us, no more lives will be killed. Now, that was because we were trying to come in contact with the Fae, and there were stories that the Fae had hurt or killed people because, obviously man did things they're not supposed to do, chasing them out of the forest, threatening them, stuff like that, and disrespecting them. But for them to say, and it's very clear, anoint us, no more lives will be killed.
Strange.
So anoint us is basically being blessed and baptized, right?
Yeah. And I would have thought, really, with from my understanding and my encounters with Fae, that actually religion doesn't hold a particular amount of power over them, not in the same way that it would with demonics or angelics or even human spirits. I'm going to have to take you back to your gnomes, because I'm again, so many questions. So you invited a gnome by saying, I want to see a gnome, which would be, there you go, you've seen a gnome, they've turned up. The other thing is, when you're talking specifically about elementals and when the Fae show themselves in a particular form, so you've seen what you believe to be a true gnome in that classic form, which would say to me that it is very much purely, an earth elemental. Often when we see these things, it's because we need something of their element within our lives at that particular moment. For instance, if we're looking for inspiration or ideas, it could be at that point that we'll see a fairy or light being, something that comes in the air. And it's that thing within us that attracts them, because it's the thing we need. So if it was maybe a point in your life where you possibly needed a little more grounding, or you needed to dig deeper with research or on some spiritual level, a lot of the time when they show themselves in those four elements, it's for spiritual reasons.
Okay. Yeah, I know I was in a relationship at the time that was, there were some issues in the relationship that I was noticing, which it did all fall apart months later. But I was noticing that there was some dishonesty coming from the other person. That was right at that time period that I saw this.
Yeah. So it may have been that it was coming in and actually physically showing it. Chris, I've got to say, I often think that you've probably got an entourage of these things around you right now. You have such an interest. I think you have a whole kind of clan of them that sort of pop in and out your life. However, that gnome probably turned up to go, think about what a gnome's about. Think about what it means in a spiritual sense. Let's look at it in that respect. Just a theory, anyway.
Yeah. When after this had happened, it obviously created another paradigm shift for me, even more than just seeing the pixies and seeing the sprites. And I just saw something fly right behind you like a mist. Right?
It happens all the time. I
just saw everybody listening. Unfortunately, this isn't recorded video, but I can see Kate, and I just saw a mist that we would call like spectral energy that we've seen during ghost hunting, and I just saw this mist float right behind you. And there's no doubt it was like that ectoplasmic type mist. So obviously, and while you were saying around you, I'm getting chills on my legs. And I kept, if you might have noticed, I keep looking to my right because I feel like I'm being watched, which obviously they are aware when you speak of them. So we do believe that we're having stuff around us right now, based on what we saw visually and what I'm actually feeling. But I may have lost my train of thought. I mean, there's so much I would love to talk about, but when I saw this gnome, not only was I amazed, and I said, why should I be amazed? I've seen angels, I've seen demons, I've seen this. I said, but this is just expanding upon something that Barry Guy and I discussed about the elementals, and then Jane Harris and I off and on, because I told him, guys, we, had an investigation at the Devon House. We came in contact with these pixies. And not only that, it expanded to where we had other conversations, other places with these elementals, realizing gnomes. I've got an EVP where they say gnome. And we realized this is a whole nother world of paranormal investigating that I want to dive into. But seeing this gnome, there was no negativity. There was no threat. I honestly just wanted to afterwards to pick him up and hug him and say, I love you, because you've just shown me that there's so much more to this world. Than the financial markets, than, sci-fi TV and this and that, and just ghosts and paranormal, that there are elementals. And yet here I am having a gnome in my house. Like, why is he in my house? How did he get here? Does he live outside? Does he live inside? Is there a group of them in the area? I don't know. I have those questions. But it is obvious that they know when you're thinking about them, and what type of rules or laws might they have to where they can or can't interact with you. That's where I want to figure out a way to where I could go into their realm and see them. I mean, I did the ayahuasca over a month ago for a couple factors. One was to try to heal my brain from my concussion years ago, maybe even my neck, to have more spiritual experiences. And I did have some of those experiences, which I'm going to talk about in my next podcast. But so don't want to go into it deeper. But the one thing I do want to mention is when the ayahuasca first kicked in, the second night, it didn't do anything for me the first night. The second night it kicked in, they had a vase with flowers and candles around it. And I started seeing these little figures, naked little figures around it, dancing with wings. And I'm looking at this going, oh my God. I'm seeing these naked little figures that are they're probably 7 inches tall, 6 inches tall, just dancing around this. And I'm like, oh my God, is my mind making this up, or am I actually seeing some type of fae that are dancing around this pot of flowers? And then I said, okay, it's begun. And then I went into this whole other creative realm consciously on the ayahuasca. I'll talk about this more next month. But we have the pixies made contact. And various times, even Barry and Jane were getting them on the recorders. They were following us. They're like, it's me, Pixie. So I have this friendship I want to maintain with the pixies. Calverton asking to see the gnomes, other elementals. Then I saw what looked like certain elves. One darted across my room. After when I came back from Calverton, I saw one walking to the park, jumped out of the grass, ran across the sidewalk, jumped back in. And it was very pencil, very thin-like, and there was people behind me. They saw me react to it, but they didn't see it because I was blocking them. So these were some type of elf-type elementals. And then we have the gnome and then the sprites. So what type of stories, I'm fascinated by hearing other people's stories about gnomes because, I need, when near-death experience, when I had my near-death experience, I researched for 35 years near-death experiences, and I know a lot about near-death experiences now to add to my own. So I feel that I'm more knowledgeable about it, but I'm not knowledgeable about gnomes. So can you share with us any other stories that you find are very compelling?
I'll start off. I think we spoke about this when I was on last about my own gnome encounter. I can't even say the word gnome. Here we go. So I was in my teens, I was in a very sacred place and I saw what I described as a gnome. It didn't look like a classic gnome. It was in the hedgerow bottom. I later then renamed it a sod, as in a sod of earth, because that's what it looked like. It looked like a cross between a very fat toad, a mouse, and a sod of earth. And that was my first physical encounter. So to say that I find it difficult to understand gnomes, I think I find it difficult to understand gnomes on a lot of different levels, because not being too hippy dippy about this, but my birth chart doesn't have a great deal of earth elements in it. I don't have a great deal of sort of Taurian or whatever energy. I'm an air sign, and I have a lot of air and a lot of fire. So those are the things that interest me. Those are the things that sort of captivate me. So when I saw this thing, it equally surprised me. As a child, I had no physical encounters whatsoever with these beings, but I knew that they existed. I knew they existed, beyond the storybooks, beyond fiction, beyond what I saw on TV. I just knew. I didn't need proof. I didn't need to see them. And one of the stories that I did hear as a child, and again, as a child, I remember thinking, no way, there's no way that this happened. And it was a famous case that happened in 1979, so just a little before I was born, in Nottingham. I know you guys went to Nottingham on help. And it was actually just outside Nottingham city centre that it occurred. And it was several children. It's disputed whether it was 6 or 8 children, ranging sort of between the ages of 7 and 10. And they basically got into a country park when they shouldn't on a Sunday evening to obviously, go off and do what kids do and muck around and play. And they had an encounter with up to 60 gnomes. I'm not talking one of them saw one gnome. Right. They saw 60 gnomes. There were 30 cars. So these gnomes came out of the bushes in these noddy cars, so these little kiddie cars. Right. And they said that there were 2 in each car. And these cars didn't have wheels, and the cars leapt over things like logs and bushes while they were chasing them about. Now, I remember hearing this story, and I probably wasn't much older than the kids in the story when I heard it. And I remember thinking, what? This is just rubbish, absolute rubbish. Because they described the gnomes in the atypical big beard, floppy, as you said, floppy bobble hat with a bobble on.
It flopped backwards.
Yeah, like a nightcap. And they were wearing primary coloured clothes, so yellows, reds, greens, blues. And it hasn't been until recently that this story's kind of come into my realm again, really. I'm a part of the Fairy Investigation Society, which is one of the oldest fairy investigation societies, I believe, globally. Started in, I think, 1928. And I was asked by the very lovely Dr. Simon Young, who is I'm going to get this wrong. It's not fairyologist. He's a writer of folklore. Okay. So he asked me to write about my understanding of the case for a book that's just come out called The Wollaton Gnomes, a Nottingham Fairy Mystery. So I thought, well, I better do some, a bit more digging into what it's about and reopen the case to myself. And it's just extraordinary, reopening it from a paranormal investigation point of view, so an investigative point of view, has changed my perception completely and blown open so many different questions. The reason why this particular case is an exceptional case in this country is because of the amount of children who saw what they saw, the amount of time that they spent having the experience, and the fact that they were interviewed 2 days later by the head teacher. They were also interviewed by a local newspaper, and their stories didn't waver. So for kids to be able to keep up and perpetuate a lie is very, very difficult. Right. They tend to shy off. If they're lying, they'll tend to back off, and at some stage say something that will give it away that they're not telling the truth. The other fascinating thing about this, I mean, there is so much to this story. I mean, I could talk for hours about it. But
we're interested. I know my viewers will be listening because you spent some time researching this. And I think that's important. And you're bringing back a story, from decades ago. I mean, this is fascinating. So please, any details you have, dive into.
So one of the things about, I don't know when you went to Nottingham, whether you had the time to go and look around the city centre at all, but part of Nottingham and parts of Nottinghamshire have dwellings carved out of the sandstone. So people would live in houses that they literally dug out of the sandstone.
Wow.
And so one of my theories that I kind of made the connection while I was researching was, are these gnomes particularly attracted to places where people dwell in the earth, like hobbit houses or, cave dwelling, etc.? So there's that element. There's loads of different questions that it's brought up. The other interesting thing for me is there were previously 2 encounters in exactly the same. Wollaton Park's a massive, massive sprawling park, both with adults. So there were 2 different adults on 2 separate occasions who had gnome encounters. And in terms of Wollaton and its mythology, I can't really find anything about fairies or ghosts so much. I mean, there are ghosts, but nothing as predominant as people's gnome encounters. And one particular story is of a woman who she's just given a name, and she has literally stated this was before the children had their experience. She was walking along in the park and she was on her own, and she basically saw the gnomes, and the gnomes took her on an extraordinary journey of very much ordinariness. Wow. So they would lead her. I think, first of all, they led her to a feather that was on the floor and showed her the beauty in the feather. And then they took her to a tree and they showed her the beauty in the leaves, etc. And this kind of built up into this crescendo where she said that they took her to a patch of grass and they parted the grass, and there was this fawn, a small deer, sleeping. And she said it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. And when she raised her gaze, she said the whole forest was just covered in these deer. They were everywhere. Oh, and they were just these magical creatures. Now, this account was given to Marjorie T. Johnson, who was, again, part of the Fairy Investigation Society. And she really did research the people who told her stories. She did her digging and her research and put together a book of accounts. So she's quite well known as an author for her authenticity when it comes to people's stories. She was very thorough about who she had, and she was also involved in recording the stories of the children in her book as well. So the two kind of marry up, and there is this sense from that, and she writes about it that Wollaton has this very old, ancient tribe of gnomes. Wow. Which is just phenomenal because, you hear of places like fairy glens or waterfalls or ancient castles in Scotland that have lots of different fairies around them. Yeah. I've never heard of anywhere that's just infested with gnomes. I don't think infested is the best word to use. Right. I don't think I've heard anywhere like it. It's crazy.
Well, that's an extraordinary case, the Wollaton gnomes. I mean, to have the children see that, keep their story straight, and then other people to have possibly some experiences prior to that is beyond incredible. It just shows that there's actually something going on there. I'd be curious if these children grown up now, would remember any further details or what their story would be now. This just makes me think of parts of the conversation that I had in Calverton talking to the elementals, whether it was the pixies as well as the gnomes. Learned how important it is to pay respect to spirit, and I paid my respect to the elementals, telling them I'm sorry that man has destroyed the forests, and they said guilty. They said, yes, guilty. We're guilty for doing that. And I told them, I said, it's my understanding that you can't go to heaven, but I'm going to talk to the Creator and tell him that I want you to come into my heaven. The heaven that I'm creating, where I'm going to live, is going to have this big tree. It's going to have this forest. It's going to have this canyon, and there's cove down there where there's the streams and the ocean. I said, I'm going to tell the Creator that I want you to be allowed into my heaven. And the responses were like, thank you. Serious. It's not your fault that you're the offspring and, you weren't directly from the Creator, but I'm going to do what I can to get you into my heaven. So I'm wondering if the one response I got was in the Isle of Arran, anoint us, is saying that they need to be prayed for or blessed or whatever. I don't know. It's still new to me in whatever agreement or reasoning they have from the Creator and how they were created. The one thing they did say, though, like I said earlier, is they hate the imps. They hate these demonic creatures because they're at battle with them, that we're not like them. And they tend to call them out, which I find is fascinating. But in some of the recordings we got too, when we're dealing with satyrs or fawn or other type of elementals, I got over 200 recordings, 200 EVPs in just one 60-minute recording while I was on the Isle of Arran that I marked. And what disturbed me a couple times was they brought up Satan. Some of the elementals or some of the whatever they were bringing up Satan. We need to talk to Satan. So it could be the imps, or it could be, are there certain elementals that do relate to or communicate with Satan? I mean, do you know anything about that?
My first impression of that kind of thing, especially when the Fae are sort of relating back. If you think about the Fae, the Fae are older than religion. They're older than history. And when they start making reference to religion, I often feel it's a mocking of us. It's a mocking of humanity, and that they are tricksters. They're not straightforward things. And they will often give us riddles to mull over, or to put us on a different path, or to make us think differently. And that can be for many, many reasons. It could be that they don't want to be disturbed. They don't want to talk, or it could be that, you're doing something wrong and they don't want you there, or it could be they're just bored. Right. They have a whole spectrum of different responses but definitely I think any response that I get from they can't lie. Right. This is the one thing about fairies. They can't out and out lie, but they can lead you on a merry dance. They certainly can and they are well documented for doing it, for playing tricks on human beings. It's kind of one of their favourite pastimes, I think, is to do that to a certain degree. So
it must be the negative entities that are lying then, because when we were at Mockery Moor, I did sense that there were imps there while we were communicating with some of the elementals, and they said, the imps lie, be careful, because sometimes they'll pretend to be us, or they'll pretend to be ghosts and spirits. But back on the island of Arran, next to Braddock Castle, I'm trying to find it right now, is an EVP that says, during the ITC session, Fae not evil. We were using an app, and it says specific words. It says Fae, not evil. Okay. But then it says Satan, something else, which I can't make out. In the app, it has phonemes, and it doesn't have complete words or sentences. So what we do is we record the session, and sometimes we hear it in real time, or we play it back, and it's right there. The good thing is it's not a radio sweeping. It's just an actual app that is spitting out, a response. So it breaks it up. It says, boom, like, I am here, that type of stuff, right? And in this case, it said, Fae, not evil. And I'm like, that's good, because there were stories of fairies and stuff putting a hump on someone's back and leading them into their death and stuff like that, where you have to look at the time. When I asked them, I said, what did man do? He says, well, man was coming in here, building the forests and doing this and expanding, which was pushing us out. So we went up into the hills. And then they would disrespect our forest, this and that, and kill some of the animals or whatever else. And so we would go after them for that. But it doesn't have to be that way, because I guess, after they had the Great Flood and this and that, a lot of the elementals were hunted down, such as the satyrs, the minotaurs, and stuff like that. And what people don't realize is I did some research because I saw what I believe was a faun and a satyr on the island of Arran. And at first I thought it was a demonic entity till I looked up its face, saw the big ears, and I realized, no, it just looks like a demon because it's got the hoofed legs of a deer, but it's just an elemental. Satyrs and fauns are written about in the Bible. Isaiah talks about them dancing in the forests and stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, that's just amazing to me.
It is amazing. And going back to the, fae aren't evil. I often liken it. I often liken that to, when we think of the animal kingdom, we don't say that animals are evil.
Right.
We say that some animals are dangerous, but we don't say that they're evil. That a snake doesn't know its nature any other way than a fairy wouldn't know its nature either. We as human beings are so utterly complex and complicated creatures that evilness is something that really only transpires, I think, within the human realm. It doesn't in the natural realm. It is just nature. There's no malevolent or benevolent. It just is the way it is by nature. And I think that's how I like to see the fae realm.
It's perception, right? It's people's fears. It's people's fears. I mean, when you look at something's hunted down, when you look at racism in the world, that's how it's increased again. Whether it's against Black, Asians, transgenders, whatever, there's this just racism stuff that goes on. That's just like, oh my God, it just doesn't go away. Yeah. You can understand why the fae wants to stay hidden. Yeah. Is because people try to bottle them up, capture them, put them on a shelf. I mean, you walk into certain hunters or trophy hunters and you see all these animals' heads all over the place. You could have human beings on this planet. You would have an elf or fairy head on the wall because they went and caught one. It's just the way that we become some humans become very violent or fearful, such as in my brief moment, I said, oh my God, am I looking at a demon as I see the hoofed legs? And then I look up and I see the torso, which was a shredded, ab-filled torso, but very hairy. I mean, thin hair, like a deer hair. And then I look up, I see the chest. I see these ears the size of deers and horses. And then I see these black horns on the head that aren't pointed. There's a little bulb on the top of them. And as I look at this elongated face doesn't have a snout. It's got a human face, but it's kind of got horsehair on it. It looks at me like, oh, you can see me, and it darts back in the hallway and takes off. And I turned to the crew and said, I just saw, what do they call that thing that plays the flute? What do they call that thing? And I'm sitting there going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And they're like, well, Chris, they're known for being on this island. And I'm like, what? But we didn't get it on camera because it wasn't part of the investigation. So for me, it's like, as crazy as it sounds, I don't care. I know what I saw. So for me, it's fascinating that I want to dive deeper into this realm. And of course, gnomes are just one part of these elementals. When I asked on the island of Arran, I said, how many of your species are here? I have an EVP of this. They said 42 are here. So if I say, how many of your species are here? How many of your species are here? Are you upset that? So it's saying either 32 or 42 species. So does that mean there's 42 or 32 different species, or that many within the species?
I would think that that's probably 42 different gnomes, 42 different species of gnomes, where you will get variations. You'll get different cousins, etc. I mean, it's seen as, pixies are cousins to imps and brownies, and hobs and goblins.
This is actually, I was trying to talk to the fays or the fairies.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be the gnomes too. I don't know. I need to be more educated on this. So when we say fae, what does that mean?
Well, that's everything. It's not. I say fae so it doesn't get confused with fairy. So fairy, to me, is when you say fairy, you think of winged creatures, the Tinker Valley things. But when I say fae, I mean the umbrella of the realm. Everything from imps, gnomes, etc.
Okay, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. So when we talk about the fae, like I said, how many fae are here? And they said 42 species. So 42 species. And I find this fascinating because years ago, 2-3 decades when I did Unknown Magazine, I used to research, and at the time, there was 13,000 new species are discovered and identified a year.
Yep.
Okay, in science. And we're not talking paranormal, we're just talking science in the realms of either the air, land, or sea. 13,000 new species a year. Now, obviously, that's probably decreased because there becomes less. But the fact of the matter is that's only in the visual spectrum. Okay, you got 90% outside the visual spectrum and other dimensions and inner dimensions, multiverse, whatever you want to talk about, is there's got to be so many other living entities and beings. I think it's incredible that we got this brotherhood and sisterhood out there that we're not even well aware of. But I guess how do you become a part of that realm? How do you become a part of that? I think it's got to be your respect for life of all living creatures.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it was interesting. I know you're going to mention ayahuasca in later on. I did an interview a few months back with Dr. David Luke, who is a leading, I don't know what to call him. He's a leading doctor into DMT experiences.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, he's absolutely brilliant to talk to, very down to earth. But he talks about his own experiences of ayahuasca journeys, etc. And he also gathers data from people who have altered states with specific drugs. And I'm not talking recreational, going out raving, whatever. I'm talking people who use this in a spiritual sense. And one of the things that fascinated me and why I wanted to talk to him was because of the same reports of seeing elves and fairies whilst on ayahuasca is global.
Wow.
Regardless of your background, regardless of what you understand about the Fae realm, everybody has the same experience.
Wow.
of these creatures. And that just blew my mind. You know, he was saying that people in the Amazon who had never come across fairy books and fairy tales, who obviously have oral histories where they'll talk to each other about mythology and storytell, but they all describe these same creatures that they come across within these ceremonies. It's absolutely fascinating. So getting in contact with them and working with them seems to be some kind of altered state of consciousness. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean a drug state. That doesn't necessarily mean a chemical shift by chemically induced. For me, that would have to be a meditative state and a deep meditative state. And oftentimes when we have these encounters, these physical encounters, is when we're not even thinking about anything. We're almost in this daydreamy, walking along, minding our own business. And I've spoken to possibly about 100 people about their Fae encounters face to face, where they just want to talk to somebody. And oftentimes when they have these encounters, they're thinking about something completely different. They're not in the now. They're not in the moment of where they're at. And it kind of snaps them back into the present when they have these. And it's often dusk or dawn, so it's obviously those twilighty type times in the day that it happens, which seems to be where Fae are most likely to be physically seen. So yeah, I think that learning how to meditate, learning how to acknowledge the natural world, because we are so disconnected, as you said. So reconnect with that, the meditation. Who knows? But I will always say this: be very, very, very careful about what energy you were trying to contact, whether it be spirit, whatever the spiritual realm. Know your own limitation. I don't know whether I said this before on the previous podcast that I did with you, but for me, having a fairy shrine in your house or a fairy garden is almost like me going to my front door, opening up the front door and shouting, "Does anybody on the street want a G&T? Gin and tonic?" I don't know who's going to come in. I don't know who's going to walk through my door. I don't know what energy they're going to bring with them or what their agenda is going to be. If you want to meet and work with Fae, make sure that you are very specific and very clear on your boundaries about what you need and what you need of them.
No, that makes sense. I think at one point I may have upset the pixie in one way because I was listening to audio and they seemed a little upset. The other thing was I know it was October 23rd, 2021, while I was in Scotland. I flew out to see Barry Guy, and we did an event at the Smethwick bathhouse.
Mm-hmm.
And while we were at the bathhouse, we had a group of people. We broke them down into two groups, and I had one group which was about 25 people. We're in a hallway, and the interesting thing is one of the individuals that was there was our director of photography from Help My House is Haunted. So I was very grateful that he got to experience this. He's right in front of me. He's like 3 feet away from me when this happened. But people recorded this on their video, and I was very fortunate that I was recording it on my recorder as well. We were using an ITC app called the Sono X Spirit Box. Mm-hmm. We were speaking to spirits in the hallways, and they were talking to us. And then it says, Chris, there's imps here. So we had to be careful there was imps. But then also I said, what else is here? And they said, gnomes. And I'm like, what? Gnomes? How many? And it said 3. And so we just started, all right, well, let's have some fun and talk to these gnomes. So we started talking to the gnomes. And during the recording, we started wondering, what do they think about those garden gnomes, those little plaster statues of them that people put on their yards? And I said, do you guys know what this? And they said, yes. And then I said, what do you think about it? Does it bother you? And a clear voice comes through that says, it's racist.
That's amazing.
I sent this audio to you. You heard it, right?
Yeah. It's just genius. You wouldn't have even thought of it, would you? But it is genius.
Oh, my gosh. And we all heard that. And like, wait. And we all started laughing like, oh, my God, it's racist. But it makes sense. It's like, would you put an statue of an Asian person on your front yard if you're not Asian? Would you do that for a black person or something else? It just seems out of, racist in a way. Mm-hmm. So we had a little conversation back and forth with them. They were very short and sweet in what they said. Mm-hmm. But at the very end, we started laughing, and I asked them another question, and they got a little snippy with me because I guess maybe I was disrespecting them because we're all laughing about it. And they said, you do this in front of other people. And it's like, you're doing this in front of other people talking to us and making a big joke about it. And I'm not. I'm trying to be respectful, but we're having fun while we're doing it. And I realized, oh, man, I got to be a little bit more respectful. Mm-hmm. So I have that recording, which I'm going to play for you guys right now. Does it bother you that people have little, plaster or clay gnomes they put in their yard? Does that bother you? Racist. Oh my God! That sounds like a little gnome.
Yeah, it's sounds like an American
Can I just tell you, I honestly, I just thank you for talking to us. I appreciate it.
This is my voice.
Okay, no. Okay, you can clearly hear where it says it's racist, even the type of personality in the way it's voiced. Let me play just that part. And because we were also talking to spirits, one of the spirits even acknowledges their presence by saying, "What's up, gnome?" But here's something else that I actually just recognized right now in listening to this again, is I asked the question, and you're going to hear an interesting response by the gnome saying, yes, it really upsets me. Does it bother you that people have little plaster or clay gnomes they put in their yard? So I found it fascinating that they're telling us something that we didn't know, that these little statues actually bothers them. But here's something else that was interesting. We all, we started laughing because we heard it's racist. We thought it was kind of funny, but also the fact that the tone of the voice clearly sounds like what a gnome would probably sound like. But then at the end, they said, sure, you do this in front of people. You're laughing at everything and doing this event, but you're doing it in front of people, which is also embarrassing. Can I just tell you, I honestly, I just thank you for talking to us. I appreciate it. You hear a woman's type voice say, of course you wanted to, and then you hear the gnome say, do it in front of people. And, obviously, we didn't know we were going to come in contact with gnomes. We didn't know we were all going to laugh because of the communication. So they were actually, in some ways, it seems, offended by this. But regardless, it is just remarkable communication. And I know you've listened to this already. I sent it to you a while ago, and we've discussed this.
Mhm.
I mean, you could tell people this story. Oh, yeah, they said racist. And they're like, oh, yeah, sure, whatever. But then when you play it, you're like, oh, my God.
Mhm.
And it sounds like that type of a personality, a gnome personality. The other thing is, as a paranormal investigator, as you know, we try to capture some form of evidence or data. I know Barry Guy's captured stuff on SLS. We've had short little figures, whether they're imps or elementals, which is completely different from a regular tall person that you would get on the SLS. That really is some conclusive evidence to have something very short in stature like that show up. Now, I know you've had a chance to listen to some of these that I emailed to you. In some of the responses we had, there was an EVP that actually Barry captured while I was working with them on Help My House is Haunted. And I know Barry's a really good friend of yours, as you know, we brought you on to discuss briefly the Devon case. In what pixies were, something interesting happened. Because we were talking to pixies and a sense that there was gnomes there, I asked if there was gnomes there. Now, I know you've listened to it already and analyzed it, and we discussed it, but I'm going to play it for the listeners right now. Are there any elementals outside, such as gnomes? Because you mentioned it in my recording. And Barry caught this, and he's like, Chris, you got to hear this. I said, oh my God, so that's like a gnome. And at first we thought maybe it says no, but no, it would just be no, not gnome, right? So they're telling us, yes, there's a gnome. And we caught it on EVP.
It really tickles me to think that Barry has these experiences, because I know Barry very, very well, and I can imagine it being quite sort of taken aback and then very excited by it. I mean, the one thing that I can say as well is I do know that the Fae will present themselves in a way that you will understand them. So they will talk in they will talk in a voice that you understand. They will dress in a way that you will understand. They will communicate in a way that you'll understand, so that you know what they are, because a gnome has a purpose. Each of the elementals have purposes. All the Fae have purposes, and they present to humans their purpose in a multitude of different ways. So, you know, when we talk about gnomes and we talk about how they look and how they dress and how they speak, one question is that because that's how we perceive them, or is that actually how they look? And I mull this over, because my gnome that I saw was very much looked like it belonged to the earth. It looked like it could just slip into the hedgerow and never be seen again. It was very well camouflaged. And I don't know why to this day why I called it a gnome to start off with, but it was a what I thought was a gnome. I didn't see the classic, Germanic gnome with the hat and the breeches on. I think if I had have seen that kind of gnome, that atypical kind of gnome, I think I would have second guessed myself. I think I would have written that encounter off. I think I would have said, there's no way I saw that. Right. I was hallucinating. But because I saw it in a way that to me felt natural and felt normal, it embedded within me. So I think if you have this kind of, and for Barry as well, I think it would have to be this sort of cartoonish character that came across to him with that kind of rounded voice, for him to really understand that he was talking to a gnome.
Yeah, it's like, that when we have an experience and we just continue to have experiences nobody else does, it's kind of hard to relate. To have someone else part of an investigation that captures the evidence and then presents it like, you got to hear this. It's like, it's great because you have a collective experience, more than one person. And, listening to, we know ghosts and spirits will sometimes appear to us based on our belief or based on what we're more fearful of or more comfortable with. And when I look back at when this gnome appeared, I mean, it was broad daylight, middle of the day. I was on the phone with Dave. I was in the bathroom, so it's kind of like this was a peeping Tom gnome. It's like, dude, I'm in the bathroom and you're peeking around watching me on the toilet. It's like, but to have not an eyewitness visually that witnessed this, but to have a friend on the phone that heard my emotional shriek, and he's like, "What the hell just happened?" And I tell him, he's right there at that moment, so that helped, But it's like, God, it's just like they say, like their dramatic illustration of this gnome, the blue little suit, the white beard, the puffy, rosy little cheeks and nose. But the top hat was not pointed up like a cone. It was more like an elf, like you'd see a Santa Claus or something, that would go back. It didn't have a little ball on the end of it. It just had the cone that just went back. But it's like,
I wonder whether you picked them up in Britain and you took them over to America with you.
And that's the question I wondered is how do they travel? Do they travel through portals, or is it under the ground with there's the fungus, right? That communicates
mycelia.
That communicates with all the trees through all the root systems. There's a network. So are they traveling through that network, or are they traveling through some type of portal? I don't know.
I mean, I've never even thought. I mean, mushrooms and fungi, my other big passion, other than the paranormal. I've never even thought about that. Gnomes sort of zipping around the subway network of mycelia. I often think that much like spirits of the dead and other energetic beings, that they can just become attached to your energy and travel with you. Just hitchhike. We know that demonics do it. They hitchhike. And I kind of guess that because they are, part energetic beings as well as part material beings, that they can just literally sort of, get in your suitcase. Maybe you just came back with a suitcase full of gnomes and you didn't even know it. But I mean, they will be attracted to you because once you start acknowledging them. And for me, Help My House is Haunted was a massive step in the right direction within the paranormal community about saying not everything out there is the spirits of the dead, not everything out there is demonic. And here we are, we have this other realm which is hugely fascinating, hugely unexplored on a modern level. Right. We have equipment available to us, we have time, we have the ability to act as surveillance and to do research, etc. And people are becoming more interested. But I mean, one of the things is, sorry that somebody's just come in. Yeah, not be a minute. His dad's in the house.
No worries.
So we have all this equipment that is available, and all these modern methods of reaching energetic beings, and then all of a sudden we've started doing that. But there is so much we can do, so much further we can take this. And I don't know that I've heard many people using modern technology, like you guys had been doing with capturing EVPs, etc. Or using the SLS. I mean, I've used the SLS and come across these creatures as well. I've had one hold my hand on an SLS camera, that was knee high. He sat holding onto somebody's knee while they were doing a deprivation experiment with earphones on. So they had no idea of what was going off in the room. And it's just crazy that we can start collating evidence with the Fae as well as the spirits of the dead. And it would be great to see that go further for me. It'd be really exciting.
I know when we were at the Devon house, the director was like, I don't know how I'm going to edit this. And I go, what do you mean? He's like, well, I had a different narrative regarding the little stove and ghosts, like maybe some type of poltergeist spirit. I said, well, they're elementals. They're creating this stuff because they're unhappy. He says, well, how do we introduce elementals? I go, what do you mean? You just document whatever we get. And then Barry and Jane had talked, and they came up to me and they were concerned. They said, no one's going to believe us. We're going to be open to scrutiny and skepticism. I said, guys, we have to put our egos aside, put what we feel about ourselves or what people are going to think, put that aside. Because you forget, we're paranormal investigators and researchers. Our job is to investigate, research, and present the findings. We're presenting the findings. This is what we found. It has nothing to do with us. It has to do with what we found. And when we took that perspective, we were able to proceed. Because you understand, like, hey, you got a ufologist or whatever, or adventurer is going out there, and this is what he discovered, a brand new species or a new tribe. It hasn't. You're the one that helped discover it. You're adding to the field of discovery, but you shouldn't be open to scrutiny because you're just reporting the data of what you uncovered.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm trying to do. So any investigators out there that want to investigate this type of phenomenon, the one advice I'd give to you, and I think Kate would agree, is don't exploit them, is have some respect, because you're going into someone else's domain, and they could get quickly irritated, just like negative spirits can, like a swarm, because you're bothering them. But if you show a friendship, you have the proper intent, I would bet that you do get some responses or some interactions, because they've always been there.
Yeah.
And probably a lot of hauntings, like Barry and I discussed, is like, Barry, this is possible that maybe 30%, 50 or 60% of hauntings could be caused just by elementals and not ghosts. And we've been getting it wrong,
Yeah. I mean, I do believe that. I mean, when I became a paranormal investigator, I didn't even put the two and two together. I had knowledge and understanding of the Fae realm, but I didn't even marry the two together under the same umbrella of paranormal. And I went out investigating, and I was tentatively working on mediumship and psychic development. And I would say, for me, 90% of my contact in a haunted property and haunted properties are from the Fae realm. I'm not saying that they're devoid of human spirits, but my high proportion of those who will own up and say, yeah, that was me throwing that picture off the wall, or that's me slamming doors, or, that's me pulling hair or scratching, it's predominantly of the Fae realm. And not of the spirit realm, the human spirit realm.
That's great. You've come to that conclusion as well. And see, that's why I love having you on, because you have this vast knowledge of elementals, and you know how they could also be partaking in the hauntings as well. Let's talk a bit more about the Wollaton Gnomes, this book you're working on. When is it coming out?
Oh, it's out already. Yeah, it's out now. It's out now.
My apologies. Where can they get this?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. So it's the Wollaton Gnomes, and it's called the Wollaton Gnomes, a Nottingham Fairy Mystery. And if you look up Dr. Simon Young, he has loads of publications and has done forewords for many different fairy books, all of which are a very good, high standard. So I do recommend any of his work. He also writes regularly for 14 Times magazine, which is a big magazine over here, paranormal magazine. So he has that crossover with the paranormal. But yeah, definitely. And the other one that I'd recommend if people want to start looking at documented cases is the Marjorie T. Johnson book. Unfortunately, she's passed away. Or I hope she has, because I'll feel really bad if she hasn't now.
Right.
And that's Seeing Fairies. And again, you can get that from Amazon. Both are definitely worth the read. The Wollaton Gnomes that I wrote for is a collection of essays by some amazing people who are folklorists, fairyologists, 14 writers. We've got archaeologists in there. We've got a lady who does dowsing, who went to Wollaton and did some research with using dowsing rods. So it's a real collection, a real wide-ranging collection of things. I've got noises going off behind me.
I've noticed that. I also saw the stuff flying behind you, and then if you've noticed me, I keep looking to the right. I feel like someone's watching me down the hallway. I would assume it's because of the topics that we're talking about. It's drawing attention from them. I've been wondering, did any of the kids that had these experiences or people related to the story many decades ago come forward?
That's the biggest mystery. So Dr. Simon Young picked this up probably 7 or 8 years ago with seriousness to look into it again. And he put out so many different shouts to social media, across newspapers, I think local news channels, etc., trying to get the kids to respond to. And he said, we'll give you complete anonymity, etc. Nobody came forward. Nobody even came forward and said, yeah, that's my cousin, or that was my auntie, or there's just been nothing. It's just been nothing at all.
I can understand that. We had one of the individuals on the new series that I did, which I can't tell you what it is yet, is they had an experience with the Fae when they were younger, but they don't want to talk about it.
No.
Because they don't want the skepticism and the scrutiny because of the line of work that they do. And then I know a friend too that's told me he saw something when he's younger, but he goes, "This, you don't repeat this, the story and this and that." I said, "Okay," and I can understand that. With me, I don't care. Okay.
No, me
because
neither.
I've had enough experiences and this is what I do. And my dad was a hockey player and told me, you don't be fearful. You just tell people, and whether they believe it or not, who cares, So that's just the way I am. I just run into a fire, right? Just run right in like Attila the Hun. But, you got to respect that, right now I'm looking at the clock, it says 333, which is interesting. Because the imps tend to always do things in threes to wake you up and the scratches and stuff like that. Now, anything else you want to share about the Wollaton Gnomes or anything else? Because then I'd like to play just a couple more EVPs, and I think that's going to wrap it up.
I think that was everything in a nutshell about.
The one thing I looked up is, because I've got gnomes here, and God only knows where they all are, but it says they're pretty much their home range is Central, Northern, and Eastern Europe. And they're even in Prussia, Sweden, France, Switzerland, Iceland. I guess they tend to like the mountains and the hills and the big forests, right?
Yeah, I think that is what we know from folklore and mythology. However, through the Wollaton Gnomes, we can obviously see that they do like well-tended gardens. They and I think that's why we have statues of gnomes in our gardens, because it's invoking them into the garden to help us maintain and give blessings and nurture to the garden that we're looking after as well. So I don't think it's just that they're just contained in those spaces. I think that they're absolutely everywhere. It's how they're culturally reported that I think is the difference, as opposed to that they don't exist.
Yeah, and it's possible too at times they can be misidentified and called a leprechaun or something else. And I think the same thing goes with these imps, where sometimes they've been called a troll, they've been called a gargoyle, they've been called anything. But then again, we have to leave it open because there's 42 species that were just on the island of Aden. And there's probably many different types of species of all of these types of elementals that, not all of them can be put exactly right into one category. And I think that's what's fascinating. We just don't know how many that could possibly exist. Yeah,
definitely.
Here's an EVP that I want to play for you. This is on the island of Aden when I'm talking to the Fae. Now, I'm understanding and sensing that they retreated because of what was done to them and done to the land, is that they left and went deeper into the hills and the forest. Here's the question and their response, where they actually say yes. So you're telling me you're upset that this was your land, and because the settlers came here, they took over. So you began to hide more in the forest. When the settlers came in, they took over our land, they started chopping everything down, we moved deeper into the forest. And they're saying yes, so they're confirming what I was picking up. But the way the yes is, it's got this echo to it, and it's multiple, as if multiple consciousnesses, voices are responding at the same time, not just one particular entity.
I think one of the fascinating things, theories about the Fae, is that they're not just, one of the theories is, as you've said, is that they are the fallen. One of the other theories is that they are ancient ancestors. So they are almost sort of the shamanic, or the head of tribes, or important people, or witches, or herbalists who have kind of stuck around on this earth plane to help guide. So they're not actually... they're actually human in origin that have evolved or shifted into this state of being. And when you are in the Scottish Highlands, where would have been incredibly sacred places to people, incredibly sacred. They would have had burial mounds, there would have been religious practices, ancient religious practices. It could be that these beings are partly deep ancestral beings that are saying, we lived here once, physically we lived here. Wow. And we've been pushed out by, marauding hordes of Vikings or whatever that have come into the area and sort of stripped our land of our beliefs. And that is another theory, and that's a theory that within Britain, at least that I know of, where people will go to ancient Neolithic burial mounds and converse with not only ancestors, but they also use them as portals to converse with the Fae. So are the two in the same, or are they separate beings?
Don't know.
It's magical, and when you get that echoing yes, or that echoing kind of voice going off, that very much instantly put me in that state of mind that this is, beings en masse. It's a lot of these beings with an ancient resonance about them say this.
Right. Plus, they've got this collective consciousness where they're all like connected together, no different than when salmon all swim together and birds all fly together, and you see them change directions, together. It's like they're connected consciously. Another thing that I had asked the Fae was, do they like crystals? And here was their response.
So you guys like crystals?
It's like, yes, we do. So why do they like crystals?
Because they hold energy. I mean, we know. I'm not a particularly crystal type of person. I'm not particularly sensitive to crystals, but there are certain crystals that I have worn, that I have kept on my being, that have definitely made subtle energetic changes that I've not even subtle energetic changes, big energetic changes around me. So if that can do that to us, then they've got to have that kind of same a law with the fairy realm. Maybe they do sort of use them in a sense of a battery. Maybe they get some energy from that they can do work with, or it could be just because they're pretty. I mean, they do like pretty things. A lot of the Fae realm, they do like sparkly, pretty things, and will collect things. So
imagine the type of knowledge they have of this planet Earth that we don't know, and they know so much more about nature, and they probably obviously could tell us the properties of crystals. But I was thinking about this, and we know if we go into alien lore, look at the military with Area 51 and stuff like that, and EB1, EB2, where they've captured alien species and they brought them into these underground facilities. I often wonder if they have a facility that has captured various elementals and they're in these cases for further study, or at some time they've communicated or captured, or they had to have, to understand these other realms of existences. I remember years ago I was listening to Terence McKenna, and he talked about DMT, but then also there was some book that was written, and a doctor talked about prescribing DMT for his patients, and they were all having experiences. And they were all coming back when they got a certain dose that they were seeing these creatures come out of the walls. So he went and took the same dose, and all of a sudden he sees these little tiny creatures come out of the walls, and they're telling him, leave us alone. You're invading our space, our dimension, our privacy. And he's like, well, why? He says, well, we don't want you guys to know about us, because then your military will come in and try to take over. That's what you do as a species. So, I mean, it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
You look at what we've done to Indians and the settlers, and even the Fae are saying here, they went up into the forests. I often wonder that, are there some of them that are trapped or have been captured within some of our realms of the military or top secret projects? I don't know.
I don't know either. Nothing would surprise me, to be quite honest. Absolutely nothing would surprise me. I do hope, I really hope deep within my soul that they can evade that kind of the capture. I really do hope that. I mean, for me, when you get interterrestrials and extraterrestrials, they are something that are quite solid mass. Right. For me, the Fae realm, I'm hoping that they're too slippery within the energetic realms to be able to be. But I'm sure somewhere along the line there has been, some development into how that could happen. Nothing would shock me. Nothing would shock me.
Right. I have one more EVP I want to play, and this is the one we were using the ITC app, and we were in front of Broddick Castle on the island of Arran in Scotland. And in the bits and pieces that comes through, it structures a sentence that says, I am the top elf Fae to the spirits. So I'm going to play this, and I want your take on this.
I'm of a top elf to the spirits. I'm of a top elf to the spirits.
So why would a top elf of the Fae to the spirits. So I'm sitting there going, okay, so does this top elf, like a king elf or whatever else, communicate with the ghosts and spirits? Like, is this the representative of the Fae? I mean, do they have, I mean, I talked to you earlier, they said they had kings and stuff like that, but I didn't expect an elf to come through when we're trying to talk to fawn and fairies. But yeah, he says, I'm the top elf, Fae, to the spirits. So when it says spirits, are they talking about the Fae spirits, or are they talking about human spirits?
It could be either.
What do you think?
It could be either or. I mean, I presume through my experiences of being in haunted properties, particularly, that they have an understanding of the spirits of the dead in that property. And oftentimes when you get properties that are malevolently haunted and have a darker edge to them, you will have a mixture of human energies that are on that darker end of the spectrum, and you will also have Fae on that darker end of the spectrum as well. So I would assume that at least the Fae are aware of the spirits or the energy of the spirits in that property, because as you've seen, properties do become infested with things that are of an impish nature, and it's kind of almost a melting pot of energy that goes off there and just becomes very, very attractive. It's almost like a pile of manure. You will get flies, that get attracted to that kind of energy. So I'm not saying that's the same with the elf. It could be that there are very regal energies still inhabiting that area. There are that they interact with,
like spokespersons and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there are stories of the elves actually being a race, an actual physical race, not a fairy race that existed, that was wiped out of history because it made history too complicated. That's the easiest way that I can put it. So if that's the case, then it could be that elf that you was talking to was the ghost elf, as opposed to an elf. There are so many possibilities, so many possibilities.
And that's the thing, is like we're just scratching the surface, but I would like to see paranormal research and investigation go further into understanding this, because their world is all around us. And the fact that we're starting to come in contact with them with our technology, and please don't get me wrong, there may have been other people on this planet that have come in contact with them with various forms of technology before us that we're not familiar with, and I would love to be familiar. If any of you out there have captured some remarkable conversations or evidence to support elementals, please get a hold of Kate or myself and share that with us. Kate, how can people get a hold of you?
So I am on Facebook, which is now called Meta, which I can't get my head around. It's still Facebook to me. So it's Kate Hairgirl. It'll come up with both my paranormal page and my personal page. I'm also on Instagram. And I think that's it for social media. I don't tweet anymore. I'm off Twitter.
Yeah, I spend more time on Twitter and Instagram than I do Facebook. So Facebook just changed its name?
Yeah, it's called Meta now.
Meta? M-E-T-A?
Yeah.
Why?
I have no idea.
It doesn't meta to me.
No, I don't know.
Yeah, looking online here, it looks like Zuckerberg had announced the name change that's coming up because the company is going to be getting into future stuff dealing with the metaverse.
Yeah.
Interesting. I guess that happens. Trends, right?
Definitely.
Well, Kate Ray, thank you very much for coming on. I know we'll be talking again in the future. You are a wealth and source of information regarding the elementals. This is Chris Fleming and Kate Ray. Thanks for listening to this edition of Spirit Talk.